good day. This is Joe, and welcome back to the studio here. And I have a little metal thing here. Look at this. Okay, look at the size of it in proportion to a 35mm film capsule. You know, when I first saw this thing, I thought it was some kind of like a metal clipboard, like one of those clipboards that has a document holder thing inside of it. But no, this is not a metal clipboard. Well, first of all, if you look on this side, there is a little latch, and you slide the latch to the right, and there are these two little tabs like this. And watch this. It is a Rooy Typewriter, ultra portable, slender, slimline typewriter. So when I first saw this, as I said, it looked to me like some kind of a metal document holder clipboard thing, but I was totally amazed at the size of this typewriter. Now, it has a lid or a case that's integral to the body. There are these two rollers on the front of the typewriter along the front side corners that slide in channels in the case lid here, like this, and it enables you to flip it over for storage. And just look at the height of it in proportion, the actual typewriter itself in proportion to a 35mm film capsule. It is thinner than a film capsule. That is about 1.5 inches. And with the typewriter situated in its base for typing, it appears to be about 3 inches tall, approximately. Okay, so once you've opened the typewriter, flipped it around right side up for typing, you want to release the carriage return lever. And so this lever flips up like that. And then you have a selector here between 1 or 2 line spacing. This is very, very similar to the early Hermes rockets and babies in terms of its size and the way it operates. So you have a basic left and right margin adjustments here. You simply push them down and slide them. Okay. You have a paper support that flips up like this, and very similar to the rockets, it'll flip down either way. There is a little paper bail, thin rod with 2 thin narrow brackets. The platen knob on the right and left side, they're very small little knobs. The platen roller is very small in diameter also, and then you have these 2 ribbon spool covers. And again, it kind of stylistically does have some resemblance to the Hermes rocket. So these open up like this, and revealing the segment and your ribbon spools. Now these spools are sub-miniature size. These are about 1 3/4 inches in diameter, and it uses the 7/16 inch wide ribbons. It does not use 1/2 inch ribbons. So getting ribbons for these is a little bit more difficult. You can't just go down to any conventional typewriter place and get a cloth ribbon for it. You need 7/16 inch ribbons. And since I currently do not have a 7/16 inch ribbon, I've been using this machine with carbon paper, which I'll show you in a little bit. The way the ribbon is threaded here is it has to be, the ribbon's spools have to be placed so that the ribbon itself is between the spool and the keyboard. In other words, coming off this way. So the ribbon comes off this way, you thread it through this guide here, and then you're going to thread it through the vibrator area, back to this guide and back to here, and then you want to take the ribbon and put it through these 2 little loops, these 2 little arm brackets. So it actually has to go through here and here up to here, but the instruction manual that I saw online recommended threading it through here, through here, through here to here, and then pulling it out and putting it in this guide here. The typewriter does not have a color selector. It is just black only. And so without a 7/16 inch ribbon, I'm not really sure if it's using the middle of the ribbon or not, but we'll find out when I get one. But so let's talk about some of the issues I found with it first, shall we? Okay, the first significant problem that I noticed was that the type bars were very sluggish to return after they come up. And so that is the usual problem involving buildup of grease and dirt in the slots of the segment and on the surfaces of the type bars themselves. So this one basically needed a lot of cleaning. And then the other thing I noticed was that as you're typing, get my hand out of the way, the ribbon spools would not turn. And pulling off the spool and looking down at this sprocket gear, I noticed that as this little arm that turns the sprocket, that little arm was actually underneath the sprocket, and the sprocket was raised up slightly. Both spools, both left and right spools, were floating up a little high, and it turned out to be this little spring right here. There is a raised little disc in the middle with a little groove underneath it, and this spring rides in that groove, and it's designed to provide a little bit of back tension on the ribbon spool, this springiness, so that the ribbon won't freewheel itself too fast and spill a bunch of ribbon out into the machine. That's one feature, one purpose it has. But the other purpose is this spring here is supposed to have a little downward bend right about here, and that keeps this sprocket in place. Well, what happened is it was reversed. Someone might have taken it out, bent it around the wrong way, or maybe they bent it by hand by mistake, but this spring was bent up slightly, and it was pulling this sprocket gear up just a little bit, like, let's see, just like that, just enough to cause these pawls down here not to engage the teeth on that sprocket, like that. Now it's back in place. Okay. So both left and right spools had that problem, so I had to, I wonder if someone didn't take this whole thing apart to service it and got these springs put in the wrong way. But the other thing I'll mention right here is there's this little knob with a green handle on it and an arrow, and that is the ribbon reversing. There's one on each side, and you flip it this way, and the other one flips over the other way. So that's how you manually reverse the ribbons. It does not have an external ribbon reversing system. Okay, the other item that I had to service on this is the spring motor that gives tension to the carriage. And when you were all printing over in the far right position, let me release the carriage here, almost like that, the drawstring would go completely slack. There wouldn't be any tension at all, and the carriage wouldn't move. And what I had to do was release the drawstring from where it's being supported here on the right side of the carriage, and then pull it back through the mechanism, and then I had to make another loop. I had to basically loop the drawstring one more complete revolution around the drum of the spring motor to give it more tension. And then I had, while this was under tension, I had to carefully thread the drawstring back through underneath the carriage and reconnect it to the right side. And that fixed that whole carriage tension problem. Since we're looking at the right side of the carriage from the rear, I'll just point out this lever right here on the back is the carriage release lever. So you would basically pull it forward to release the escapement for moving the carriage by hand. And as you might be able to see underneath there, it's just pivoting the rack gear out of the way of the escapement, like that. And then the other lever more forward of that, closer to the platen knob, is the tension release for the pressure rollers. So you pull that forward and you can release the tension for feeding paper into the machine. So that's pretty much the only controls on the right side of the platen besides the platen knob itself and of course the right margin setting. You might also notice down in here there's no bell. Nope, this typewriter does not have a bell. And then on the left side of the platen, you have basically two controls. This lever right here, which is your line spacing between 1 and 2 lines, okay? And then this lever here, if you pull it forward, it disengages the ratcheting, so you can smoothly turn the platen for instance, using forms, and then when you push it back, it re-engages the same ratcheting, the same line system. So there you go. That's pretty much the only controls on the On the Carriage, of course, the left margin adjustment where you just simply push it down and slide it back and forth. Now, you might be able to tell this is a Carriage shift machine, and one of the things I do like about it is the fact that instead of lifting the entire carriage up like some Carriage shift machines, it's really pivoting the carriage. So the back side of the carriage actually goes down, while the front side of the carriage, where the platen is, the front surface of the platen, goes up a little bit. So you're not really lifting the entire weight of the carriage when you're shifting. You're just pivoting the carriage along an axis like that, and that makes the shifting action quite a bit easier than on a traditional carriage shift that lifts it. And since we're here, you might notice, if I can focus on it properly, that the platen is pretty worn. There is a lot of divots and little just wear marks in the platen, and it's very, very hard, which explains why this typewriter is pretty loud, unfortunately. Okay, this particular typewriter comes in a AZERTY keyboard configuration. If you're not familiar, of course, instead of QWERTY, you have AZERTY, and the W is down here, and I believe the M has been moved over from next to the N. It's moved up to here. Some other differences you might notice about this keyboard is all the digits, the numerals 2 through 9, are shifted. And then you have punctuation marks down on lowercase on those letters, and including a left and right parentheses symbol. And what I like about it actually is I like having the apostrophe as a lowercase symbol here below the 4, because you know, if you're writing a lot of business type formal correspondence, you may not be using that many contractions. But if you're writing fiction, contractions happen all the time because of the way dialogue works and the way people talk usually. They use a lot of contractions. So it's really nice having a lowercase apostrophe. You don't see that in too many manual typewriters. It's really until the electric typewriters came out that you really saw that. But I like that feature. However, it does take some getting used to. For me, not being a native French speaker or used to a French keyboard, it's taken some time getting used to using this keyboard. And of course, down here, you're going to also find that the period is a shifted, it's uppercase. There is no lowercase period. You have a comma, question mark, semicolon, period, colon, / equals, and plus. And then, of course, a percentage up here. And then with a diacritic, whatever, accented U. And then this key right here is the uppercase is an umlaut, and the lowercase is another punctuation mark that I'm unfamiliar with. But this is a dead key. When you hit it, the carriage does not move. So this enables you to put these accent marks over whichever letter you would like to use. Here's another little thing that, as a person used to an American or an English keyboard, I think is really cool, is the degree symbol. It's pretty neat having that. So I don't know, I kind of like it. So then you also have the margin release button here, and of course the backspace button back here, and your usual left and right shift levers. The shift lock being here, and the shift lock is only released with the left button. The right button does not release the shift lock, so you have to use the left one to release it. And of course the space bar. And this is a single spaced machine, meaning when you push the space bar down, nothing happens. When you release it, then it makes the space. Some machines are half-space machines, but this is a single-space machine. So besides being very dirty and need of cleaning and degreasing, another little problem this typewriter had is the little latch here. It's a spring-loaded latch for releasing the typewriter, and it would hang up in the right position. It wouldn't snap back automatically. And what that means is when you went to close the typewriter, it needs to be in the left-hand position in order for the catch to catch the little lock, and you'd have to manually remember to slide it back. And all I did is I just loosened up these two little screws. There's a housing behind there. Took this little housing cover off, and then I was able to put some silicone lubricant down into the locking mechanism and got it loosened all loosened up, I should say, and now it works fine. So I showed you earlier how the typewriter unfolds and deploys. And the way that you want to fold it back into its covered position for carrying is, first of all, you want to move the carriage a little bit to the left. And then you're going to want to take the line advance carriage return lever, swing it all the way in, and then fold it down like that, and then fold it all the way down. And then when you push the carriage back to the right, this lever will stop right on the bracket, and that will center the carriage. You're ready to fold the typewriter up, and you want to just make sure again that this lock right here, this latch, is to the left. And then there are two little tabs, one here and one here, and you basically grab it by either one or both, and you pull the typewriter up, flip it around carefully, and then this little latch mechanism will latch right there and close it up, and you can carry it. As I said earlier, this latch, when I first tried it, it was broken, but to open it up, of course, you release it and then you raise the typewriter up like that. You'll notice there is some empty space inside the typewriter, and this got me curious because you can pull this typewriter back, you can see the empty space back there. Let me show you something here. Now look at that. I've placed a number of pages inside the case here. You can apparently store typing paper in here, and it's pretty cool. You can carry your typing paper with you as you go. I had mentioned earlier all the different issues that I had to repair in this typewriter to get it more in good working condition. There was one thing that was definitely broken, however, and it was the original carrying handle. There is a handle here that folds out. It's originally made of this phenolic plastic material that you might be able to tell is really badly deformed. And so the ends of the handle have this little kind of a bolt or a stud that sticks out. It sticks into the machine, and there is a groove on the end of that, and that engages a spring inside the case that holds the handle, gives it a little tension. But this handle was totally broken, and so what I had to do is fashion my own handle. And so what I did with this handle is I made it out of a 1/2-inch brass L channel and a 1/2-inch diameter brass tube, and I assembled the parts together with rosin core electronic grade solder. Yes, I soldered it together, and I know it's lead tin solder. Yeah, there's lead in the handle. If I was going to make one of these for somebody else, I have a slightly different idea. I would use a thicker stock of brass, and I would use some machine screws, but I assembled it with solder because it's a common way that I put together a lot of experimental things. It's easy to solder, and it's pretty strong, and it looks nice, and I like the way it snaps right into the little storage channel for the handle. So these 1024 machine screws penetrate through the holes, which I did not have to drill out. That's why I chose that size. And then I reattached the same springs. They originally wrapped around the groove in this little bushing, and then they hook onto a little tab here. And those springs are really just to keep the handle from flopping around too loose. It puts a little tension on it. Well, then to hold my bolts in place, I'm using nylock nut on each side. So that's my little makeshift handle. It works pretty good, I think. And I really like the way the handle now just folds down and locks into place nice and securely. I really love it. So I mentioned earlier that I don't have a 7/16" ribbon for this typewriter. So how was I able to test it? Well, this is what I've been doing. I've been doing carbon casting. Yes, carbon paper. Using carbon paper backed against regular paper, and this is how I've been testing it. You can tell perhaps this typewriter, because of the hardness of the platen, it makes quite an imprint, and it does knock out little holes and stuff in the carbon paper, so it does really need a new recovered platen. But for now, I'm using carbon paper. Let me show you how I do that. To open up the lid, flip the typewriter around, set the carriage release lever to single line spacing, So I have a sheet of carbon paper, and I'm going to use a sheet of regular paper. And sometimes I'll actually use a backing sheet, just because the imprint on this is so heavy. The operating manual online said to make sure you push the paper all the way down, and then it'll grab the pressure rollers, and I found that to be pretty good advice. So you can see there's a little bit of uneven feeding of the rollers here, so I'm going to release the tension lever and kind of get this re-centered. Something like that. We don't have to be exact with it. Okay. Okay, let's try this out, huh? W. Shifted period. You can probably tell this thing is pretty noisy. And I do have to pause every once in a while when I'm typing these letters that are in the wrong location for what I'm used to. So as far as the feel of the machine itself, the type bars have a nice snappy touch to it. And from what I was reading on Robert Messinger's Oz Typewriter page, he has a blog article from a few years back about the Rooy and Roxy typewriters. The designer of the typewriter had intended for them to have a nice snappy touch, and they do indeed. In fact, it does remind me somewhat of the Hermes rocket, the earlier Hermes rockets with it. And in fact, I think it's a little bit nicer than the Hermes rocket. The carriage return lever is a little bit slightly bigger than the rocket, but not really that much. But as you might be able to hear, even from my lav mic I have on my shirt here, this is a really loud typewriter. A lot of it, I think, has to do with the platen, but also the fact you have this box, this hollow space underneath, and all this thin sheet metal, and it kind of just resonates with the sound of typing. So that doesn't really help the sound of it at all. And as you might be able to tell, the imprint on the carbon paper is pretty noticeable. So you can kind of follow along where you've been typing just from the imprint it makes. And it is a 10 character per inch pica typeface, and it actually looks pretty good, actually. The type alignment, of course, I do have some misspellings because I'm still not used to the AZERTY keyboard, but you know, it's a pretty nice typeface, and imprint is not bad. The upper lowercase alignment is pretty good. Maybe a slight misadjustment, but not bad at all. Well, I think it's important to point out that this is an ultra-portable typewriter, one of the slenderest, if not the slenderest typewriter made, and so there is obviously going to be some intrinsic limitations, design and manufacturing limitations of a typewriter like this as compared to a larger portable or a standard typewriter. So, for instance, just to draw a few of them to attention, there is no bichrome color selector for the ribbon. It's a single color only. Very similar to like your Hermes rocket. Secondly, you don't have a touch selector. Okay. Thirdly, the platen is maybe 7/8 of an inch in diameter, very small diameter platen roller, so you probably won't be able to use business cards and certainly not postcards or any kind of stiff paper cardstock in the machine. You only have, like with many common ultra-portable machines, you only have a carriage release lever on the right-hand side of the platen. You have in this particular sample, you have the AZERTY keyboard layout instead of the American or English one. It depends what you're used to, of course. And this particular machine, having a very rock-hard platen, is pretty loud, but there's also some kind of resonance that happens with this machine just because I think the way the hollow body, it sits in this hollow body, and it just resonates and gets kind of loud. So you may not want to take this to your Starbucks and type inside, maybe out on the patio, but the advantage or benefit, I would say, of this typewriter, when you decide to fold this typewriter back into its case, you can grab it at a moment's notice, take it with you, and look how skinny that thing is. Isn't that remarkable? So it is truly an ultra-portable typewriter. no doubt about it. Now, one other feature I wanted to point out to you is there is this little panel here. It's a hinged panel that is on the underneath side of the typewriter once it's flipped over. And let me unlatch the typewriter and flip it over like that. You can see that that panel is underneath the keyboard. And the purpose of it is to allow room for the type bars to travel when you're pressing the keys. And you can see that it pops itself loose. It hinges open once you set it down in the machine and start typing, and that gives room for the linkage to travel a little bit further. So yes, the body of the typewriter itself is only 1.5 inches deep, but it uses some of the depth in the case here for the type bar movement. Another little feature this typewriter has reminds me of a lot of the Japanese Brother machines, and that's this little wire loop right below the type guide, and that's sort of a little spring designed to slow down the impact of the type bars against the platen there. So it hits them and it kind of gives a little slowing down action. As we flip the typewriter upside down, there are 4 little quarter circle shaped feet that are very much worn down to almost nothing. And I'm going to be replacing these or covering these. I bought a large neoprene rubber gasket at the hardware store, and I'm going to cut it into fourths, and I'm going to glue each quadrant onto here with Gorilla Glue. And that should restore some grippiness to the bottom of the typewriter. But I noticed when I was typing on a regular desk that this doesn't slide around nearly as badly as my Hermes Rocket when you're doing the carriage return with that really short carriage return lever. It seems to sit pretty still, and maybe because it might be slightly heavier. In any event, you can see also, since we're here, you can see this typewriter has had a lot of use over the years. You can see there's a little bit of a dent right here, and something went on right here, and there's a couple little dents here from impacts over the years, but it's in remarkably good shape. Okay. Well, you might be thinking to yourself, Joe, I'm in the market for an ultra portable typewriter. I know there are others out there like Olivetti Letteras and Hermes Rockets and Smith Corona Skywriters and Groma Calibris and a lot of other, the Brothers, a lot of other ultra portables to consider. Joe, would you consider getting one of these as an ultra portable? Well, they're actually fairly rare. They're relatively difficult to find, and the build quality is not too bad. I think it's probably similar to a Hermes Rocket. Maybe a little better build quality, but I think they're kind of rare. And so they're very compact to carry, obviously, and they deploy nicely. They have an integrated lid that becomes the base of the typewriter, so you don't have to like take the lid off and have to figure out where am I going to store the lid while I'm typing. This particular machine, though, is pretty loud. And as I said earlier, you can attribute that to partly to the platen being so hard, but also I think it's just the design of this metal box. It tends to resonate, so that is something to consider. Also, the intrinsic limitations of ultra-portable typewriters over medium-sized portables is something to consider. And then there's the fact that this is an 7/16" wide ribbon system, not the general 1/2" wide ribbon. I currently have a 7/16" bulk ribbon supply on order that I'm going to be re-threading onto these existing spools. But until then, I can only type on this with carbon paper. Oh, and I was going to mention, by the way, the carbon paper thing before I forget. Yeah, so carbon paper, you could consider it to be a hassle, right, in some ways. But think of it this way. If you're corresponding to someone and you write a letter and mail it off to them, with carbon paper you have an automatic backup copy of what you wrote. You can throw this in a folder and you'll be able to sit there and read it and figure out what did I write to them, and I can actually read that. So this gives you an automatic kind of a backup copy of whatever you wrote. So that's something to consider. It does, though, increase the cost of using the machine, since carbon paper, although it's inexpensive, it's not free. Well, this is Joe, and this is the Rooy Ultra Portable Typewriter. I'm kind of excited about having receive this machine. It's such a unique design, and I'm glad I was able to fix all of the problems I've seen in it so far. As far as the platen roller itself, I might get it re-sleeved, or I might try covering it in thin tubing. The trick is how easy it is to get out of the carriage. How easy is it to remove and reinstall some of these little ultra portables? That is very intricate and kind of tricky. But anyways, I'll keep you guys informed on if I do decide to go ahead and upgrade the platen itself. But until next time, this is Joe Van Cleve. Have yourselves a great day.